I'm Jessica, 31, from Phoenix, Arizona. When my dad's business partner looked directly at me during their emergency board meeting and said, "Jessica is just the help around here, she doesn't get a vote on company decisions," I smiled and replied, "Actually, Michael, as the silent majority owner of this company, I think I do." The stunned silence that followed was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building my secret investment portfolio over the past 4 years. The look of absolute shock on Michael's face when I placed those ownership documents on the conference table was a moment I'll never forget. 4 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and treated like an administrative assistant despite my business degree and crucial contributions to our family's construction company had led to this single powerful revelation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in the sprawling desert city of Phoenix, I was always surrounded by the sounds of construction. The rhythmic hammering, the whir of power tools, and the constant hum of machinery became the soundtrack of my childhood. My father, Robert Martinez, had worked in construction for over 30 years before he finally took the leap to start his own company when I was 16. Martinez Construction and Design began as a dream in our garage, with Dad's weathered toolbox and decades of experience as the only assets. I remember those early days vividly. Dad would spread architectural plans across our kitchen table after dinner, explaining to me how foundations were laid, how electrical systems worked, and why certain materials were chosen for specific projects. While other teenagers were obsessing over social media and weekend parties, I found myself genuinely fascinated by the intricacies of building something from nothing. There was something deeply satisfying about watching raw materials transform into beautiful, functional spaces where families would create memories. By the time I graduated high school, Martinez Construction had grown from a one-man operation to a small team of 5 contractors specializing in custom residential homes. Dad had a reputation for quality craftsmanship and fair pricing, which kept him busy throughout Phoenix's booming construction market. When I left for Arizona State University to pursue my business degree, I already knew I wanted to be part of the family company's future, though I wasn't sure exactly how that would unfold. During my college years, I spent every summer and winter break working alongside Dad and his crew. I started with basic administrative tasks like organizing permits and scheduling inspections, but my role quickly expanded as I demonstrated an aptitude for project coordination and client relations. I discovered I had a natural ability to anticipate problems before they became costly delays, and I could communicate complex construction concepts to homeowners in ways that made them feel confident and informed rather than overwhelmed. It was during my junior year at ASU that Dad first mentioned his conversations with Michael Thompson, a businessman who had approached him about a potential partnership. Michael owned several rental properties around Phoenix and had connections with commercial developers who could provide Martinez Construction with larger, more lucrative projects. Dad was intrigued by the possibility of expanding beyond residential work, but he was also cautious about bringing in an outside partner after building the business entirely on his own. Michael Thompson was everything my father wasn't in the business world. Where Dad was humble and soft-spoken, Michael was bold and commanding. Where Dad wore work boots and construction-stained jeans, Michael arrived at meetings in expensive suits and drove a pristine BMW. He spoke in corporate buzzwords about scaling operations and leveraging synergies, using language that made Dad feel like he needed a translator to understand his own business. When I met Michael for the first time during my senior year of college, I immediately sensed something that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't articulate it at the time. He had a way of speaking to my father that was simultaneously respectful and condescending, praising Dad's construction expertise, while subtly implying that he lacked the business sophistication necessary for real growth. Michael would say things like, "Robert, you're an incredible craftsman, but you think like a contractor, not like a CEO." That's where I come in. The partnership agreement they eventually signed seemed reasonable on paper. Michael would invest $200,000 in equipment and working capital in exchange for a 50% stake in the company. He would handle business development, client relations for commercial projects, and financial management, while Dad would oversee all construction operations and maintain his relationships with residential clients. They projected that the partnership would double their revenue within 2 years by expanding into commercial construction and property development. Initially, the partnership appeared to be everything Michael had promised. Within 6 months, Martinez Construction and Design had landed 3 significant commercial projects, including a small office complex and 2 retail renovations. The company moved from Dad's converted garage office to a legitimate business space in a light industrial area of Phoenix, complete with a proper conference room, drafting tables, and space for storing materials and equipment. However, as the business grew, I began to notice subtle changes in how decisions were made and credit was distributed. Michael had a talent for positioning himself as the face of the company's success, while relegating my father to the role of the guy who handles the construction side. In client meetings, Michael would present himself as the strategic visionary, while introducing Dad as, quote, our head contractor, a title that technically wasn't inaccurate, but somehow diminished Dad's role as the company's founder and the source of its reputation for quality. After graduating with my business degree, I officially joined Martinez Construction as what Michael designated administrative coordinator. Despite my education and my deep understanding of both the business and construction aspects of our operations, I was assigned a starting salary of $32,000 annually. To put this in perspective, Michael had recently hired his 22-year-old nephew Brad as a business development associate at $45,000, despite Brad having no construction experience and a communications degree from a mid-tier university. When I questioned the salary disparity with my father, his response revealed how much influence Michael had already gained over business decisions. Michael handles all the compensation and staffing decisions now, Dad explained with a slight edge of discomfort in his voice. He says he needs to structure things according to industry standards and market rates. The implication was clear. Michael had convinced my father. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That his daughter's contributions were worth less than those of an inexperienced nephew with the right connections. My daily responsibilities quickly expanded far beyond what anyone would consider administrative coordination. I managed project timelines for multiple simultaneous construction jobs, coordinated with subcontractors and suppliers, handled permit applications and inspection scheduling, and served as the primary point of contact for many of our residential clients. I developed systems for tracking material costs and labor hours that improved our profit margins by identifying inefficiencies and preventing cost overruns. Despite these contributions, Michael consistently introduced me to clients, suppliers, and industry contacts as our office manager or Robert's daughter who helps with paperwork. During project meetings, he would ask me to take notes and handle scheduling while he and Dad discussed, quote, the important decisions. When clients called with questions about their projects, Michael would often intercept these calls and position himself as the primary point of contact, even though I typically had more detailed knowledge of their specific project status. The most frustrating aspect of this dynamic was watching Michael take credit for improvements and innovations that I had developed. When I created a digital project management system that allowed us to track multiple jobs simultaneously and identify potential delays before they became costly problems, Michael presented it to a local construction industry publication as his initiative to, quote, modernize Martinez Construction's operations through technology integration. Similarly, when I negotiated a bulk purchasing agreement with our primary lumber supplier that saved the company approximately $50,000 annually, Michael told clients and industry contacts that his vendor relationships and negotiation skills had secured these favorable. He had a remarkable ability to transform my behind-the-scenes work into examples of his business acumen and strategic leadership. Perhaps most telling was an incident that occurred during my second year with the company. We were working on a commercial office renovation when I noticed during my review of the architectural plans that the proposed electrical layout violated Phoenix fire codes in several significant ways. The architect had apparently overlooked the spacing requirements for emergency lighting and the placement of electrical panels relative to fire exits. If we had proceeded with construction as planned, we would have faced expensive corrections during final inspection, potential fines from the city, and possible liability issues if there had ever been an emergency. I immediately brought this issue to Michael's attention, providing him with the specific code violations and suggested corrections. Rather than acknowledging my discovery, Michael called an emergency meeting with the client and the architect, where he presented himself as having identified these, quote, critical safety oversights, during his, quote, comprehensive review of the project specifications. Not only did he take credit for catching the problems, but he actually criticized me in front of the client for not being thorough enough in my administrative review of the documents. This incident was a turning point for me. I realized that no matter how valuable my contributions were to the company's success, Michael would never acknowledge my role as anything more than clerical support. My father, who had always valued my input and recognized my capabilities, seemed increasingly reluctant to challenge Michael's authority or defend my contributions in professional settings. The final straw came during a client presentation for a major residential project, where I had spent weeks developing cost estimates, timeline projections, and material specifications. Michael presented my entire analysis as his own work, referring to the research my team and I conducted, while I sat silently in the corner, designated as the person responsible for operating the projector and distributing handouts. That night I went home to my small apartment in Tempe and made a decision that would change the trajectory of my career and my relationship with the family business. Instead of continuing to fight for recognition within the existing power structure, I would create my own leverage by becoming an investor in the company. If Michael wanted to treat me like an outsider despite my contributions and qualifications, I would become an outsider with ownership rights and decision-making authority. The plan I developed required patience, strategic thinking, and access to capital that I didn't yet possess. Fortunately, I had been building a consulting practice on weekends and evenings, helping other small construction companies in the Phoenix area streamline their operations and improve their project management systems. This side business provided me with additional income and deep insights into industry best practices that I could apply to Martinez Construction. Additionally, my grandmother had established a trust fund for me that would mature when I turned 28. The trust contained $180,000 from the sale of property she had owned in California, money that she had specifically designated for my future business endeavors or real estate investments. When combined with my consulting income and careful savings from my salary, I would have access to substantial capital for investment purposes. The legal structure I created for my investment strategy was intentionally complex and designed to maintain my anonymity while I built my ownership position. Working with my friend Lisa Chen, who had recently passed the Arizona bar exam and specialized in corporate law, I established JM Holdings, LLC as an investment company. The company name was generic enough to avoid suspicion, while the JM initials could refer to Jessica Martinez without being obvious to anyone reviewing financial documents. Over the course of 18 months, JM Holdings made a series of small investments in Martinez Construction and Design, purchasing minority stakes whenever my father needed capital for equipment purchases, working capital, or expansion opportunities. Each transaction was properly documented and filed with the appropriate state agencies, but the purchases were small enough and spread out over sufficient time that they didn't trigger any requirements for disclosure of ownership concentration. My father was delighted to have found what he believed was a patient, supportive investor who understood the construction business and didn't pressure him for unrealistic returns or operational changes. Michael was equally pleased because the steady influx of capital allowed him to pursue larger projects and more ambitious growth plans, without requiring him to contribute additional personal funds or dilute his own ownership position. What neither of them realized was that Jessica Martinez, the administrative coordinator they routinely dismissed and overlooked, was systematically acquiring control of the company they thought they were running. By my 30th birthday, JM Holdings owned 37% of Martinez Construction and Design. By my 31st birthday, that ownership had grown to 51%, making me the majority shareholder of my family's business. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. While Michael spent client meetings explaining to people how he was the business brain behind Martinez Construction's success, I was literally the person funding that success through my investments. While he positioned himself as the strategic decision-maker, I was the one with ultimate legal authority over the company's direction. While he treated me like clerical staff, I was actually his boss, though he had no idea. Maintaining this secret required considerable discipline and strategic thinking. I had to be careful never to display knowledge or insights that couldn't be explained by my official role in the company. I had to resist the temptation to assert authority or challenge decisions in ways that might raise suspicions about my true position. Most importantly, I had to continue allowing Michael to take credit for my contributions, while I quietly documented everything for the moment when I would finally reveal my hand. The waiting was often excruciating, especially during meetings where Michael would dismiss my input or make decisions that I knew were suboptimal for the company's long-term success. There were countless moments when I wanted to stand up and announce that I owned the company, and that his condescending attitude toward me was not only personally offensive, but professionally inappropriate. However, I understood that timing would be crucial for maximum impact, and I needed to wait for the right moment when my revelation would carry the most weight and create the most significant shift in our working relationship. That moment would come sooner than I expected, triggered by Michael's most ambitious and potentially destructive scheme yet. His plan to bring in his brother-in-law as an investor wasn't just about solving a short-term cash flow problem. It was about permanently restructuring the ownership of Martinez Construction in a way that would give him control over the company my father had built and I had been secretly funding for years. The emergency meeting he called that Friday afternoon was designed to present Dad with a fait accompli, a solution to our financial crisis that would also happen to serve Michael's long-term interests in gaining control of the business. What he hadn't anticipated was that the quiet young woman he'd been dismissing as just the help for years was about to become the most powerful person in that conference room. The warning signs had been accumulating for months before the crisis that would finally force my hand. Michael's behavior had become increasingly bold as he grew more confident in his perceived control over the company. What started as subtle credit-taking and dismissive comments had evolved into outright undermining of my father's authority and blatant disregard for my contributions to our operations. The first major red flag appeared during our quarterly financial review in March. I had prepared a comprehensive analysis showing that our residential projects consistently delivered higher profit margins than our commercial work, despite Michael's constant push to focus exclusively on larger commercial contracts. The data clearly demonstrated that while commercial projects brought in more total revenue, the additional overhead, extended timelines, and complex subcontractor management actually reduced our profitability per dollar invested. When I presented these findings during our team meeting, Michael's response was swift and cutting. He glanced at the spreadsheets I had spent weeks preparing and dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "Jessica, I appreciate the effort you put into organizing these numbers, but financial analysis requires understanding market dynamics and industry trends that go beyond basic bookkeeping. The residential market in Phoenix is becoming saturated, and commercial development is where the real growth opportunities exist." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. But what bothered me more was the way he completely ignored the substance of my analysis. I hadn't simply organized existing numbers. I had conducted a thorough examination of our cost structures, timeline variations, change order frequencies, and client payment patterns across both market segments. The conclusion that residential work was more profitable wasn't based on basic bookkeeping, but on sophisticated financial modeling that would have impressed any business school professor. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair during this exchange, clearly recognizing the value of my work but seemingly unwilling or unable to challenge Michael's dismissal. This pattern had become increasingly common over the past year. Dad would acknowledge my contributions privately but remain silent when Michael publicly minimized or mischaracterized my role in company operations. The second warning sign came in April when Michael announced that he would be restructuring our client communication processes. Under his new system, all client contacts would be routed through him directly, with other team members providing input only when specifically requested. This change effectively removed me from direct client relationships that I had been managing successfully for over 2 years. "We need to present a more professional face to our clients," Michael explained during the staff meeting where he announced this change. "Having multiple people communicating with clients can create confusion and mixed messages. From now on, I'll handle all primary client communications, with Robert focusing on on-site construction management and Jessica supporting with documentation and scheduling coordination." The implications of this restructuring were immediately clear to me, even if they weren't obvious to everyone else in the room. By positioning himself as the sole client contact, Michael was essentially claiming ownership of all client relationships and ensuring that any future business would be attributed to his relationship-building efforts, rather than the quality of our work or the rapport I had developed with many homeowners. More troubling was the way this change was implemented. Michael didn't consult with me about transitioning my existing client relationships or ask for my input on communication protocols that I had been developing and refining for years. Instead, he simply announced the new structure and expected everyone to comply without discussion or feedback. The impact on our operations was immediate and negative. Several clients expressed confusion and frustration about suddenly being redirected to Michael for questions about projects they had been discussing with me for months. Mrs. Chen, whose custom home renovation I had been coordinating since January, called the office 3 times in 1 week trying to get updates on permit approvals that I could have answered in 30 seconds, but that Michael needed to research because he wasn't familiar with the specific details of her project. By May, the inefficiencies created by Michael's communication monopoly were beginning to affect our project timelines and client satisfaction scores. However, when I tried to discuss these issues with him, he brushed off my concerns as resistance to change and suggested that any problems were temporary adjustment issues that would resolve themselves as the new system became more established. The third and most serious warning sign emerged in late May when I discovered that Michael had been having private conversations with several of our key subcontractors about potentially working with him on projects outside of Martinez construction. I learned about these discussions accidentally when Carlos Ruiz, our primary electrical contractor, mentioned during a casual conversation that Michael had approached him about, quote, some exciting opportunities that might be coming up soon. When I pressed Carlos for details, he seemed surprised that I wasn't aware of Michael's inquiries. He said he was exploring some new business ventures and wanted to know if I'd be interested in working with him exclusively on certain types of projects. He mentioned something about maybe starting a separate company focused on high-end commercial work. This revelation was deeply troubling for several reasons. First, Michael's partnership agreement with my father included a non-compete clause that specifically prohibited him from pursuing construction projects independently while he was a partner in Martinez Construction. Second, his discussions with our subcontractors suggested that he was planning to use relationships and connections developed through our company for his own benefit. Third, the timing of these conversations coincided with his increasing criticism of our current business model and his push to focus exclusively on commercial projects. I realized that Michael might be laying the groundwork to leave Martinez Construction and take our most valuable subcontractors, and potentially some of our commercial clients with him. This scenario would leave my father with a depleted business, damaged relationships, and the challenge of rebuilding operations that had taken years to develop. The more I thought about Michael's recent behavior patterns, the more convinced I became that he was executing a deliberate strategy to position himself for an exit that would maximize his benefit while minimizing any consideration for my father's interests or the company's long-term stability. His dismissive treatment of me wasn't just personal rudeness. It was part of a broader pattern of consolidating control and preparing for a transition that would leave the Martinez family with significantly less than we had built. This realization fundamentally changed my perspective on the timing of my ownership revelation. I had originally planned to wait until I owned 60% of the company before making my position known, giving me an even stronger majority stake. However, Michael's apparent preparations for departure or restructuring meant that waiting could allow him to damage the company's value or steal crucial business relationships before I could assert control. June brought the crisis that would finally force everything into the open. The cash flow problem that triggered Michael's emergency meeting wasn't entirely unexpected. Construction companies frequently face timing mismatches between project expenses and client payments. What was unusual was the severity of our situation and the way Michael chose to handle it. The immediate problem stemmed from a commercial office renovation project where the client had promised final payment upon completion, but then delayed that payment by 6 weeks due to their own financing complications. The $180,000 they owed us represented funds we needed to meet payroll for our construction crews and pay suppliers for materials already delivered to other job sites. In a healthy business relationship, partners would explore multiple solutions to a temporary cash flow shortage. We could have pursued a line of credit using our current projects as collateral, negotiated extended payment terms with our suppliers, or even advanced funds from our company's accumulated reserves. Michael, however, presented only one option: bringing in his brother-in-law, David Thompson, as an emergency investor. David Thompson was a real estate developer who owned several apartment complexes in Scottsdale and had recently sold a commercial property for a substantial profit. According to Michael, David was willing to invest $300,000 in Martinez Construction in exchange for a 30% ownership stake, with the understanding that this would be an active investment rather than a passive financial arrangement. The terms Michael proposed were heavily skewed in David's favor. For his $300,000 investment, David would receive 30% ownership, a seat on a newly created board of directors, and veto power over any major business decisions. The ownership restructuring would reduce my father's stake from 50% to 35%, and Michael's from 50% to 35%, with David controlling the largest single block of shares. Even more troubling were the operational changes Michael suggested should accompany David's investment. He proposed that David should take over all financial management and strategic planning for the company, leveraging his real estate development experience to guide Martinez Construction into larger and more sophisticated projects. Michael would focus on business development and client relations, while my father would be relegated to, quote, construction operations management, essentially making him a highly paid foreman rather than a company owner. When my father expressed concerns about losing control of the company he had built, Michael's response revealed the depth of his condescension and manipulation. "Robert, you're an incredibly skilled craftsman, but you've never really understood the business side of construction. David and I have the financial and strategic expertise to take this company to the next level. You'll still be involved in everything you're good at, but we'll handle the complex business decisions that require specialized knowledge." The implication that my father lacked the business sophistication to run his own company was both insulting and strategically calculated. Michael was positioning the investment not as a temporary solution to a cash flow problem, but as a permanent correction of my father's perceived inadequacies as a business leader. What made this proposal even more manipulative was the artificial urgency Michael created around the decision. He claimed that David's offer was time-sensitive, and that we needed to accept or reject it by the end of the week. This timeline didn't allow for exploring alternative financing options or negotiating better terms. It was designed to pressure my father into accepting a deal that would permanently alter the power structure of his own company. I spent the entire week leading up to the Friday meeting, analyzing Michael's proposal and preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. The financial terms were clearly disadvantageous to our family's interests, but the structural changes were even more concerning. Under Michael's plan, the Martinez family would go from owning 100% of Martinez Construction to owning 35%, with effective control shifting to Michael and his brother-in-law. The more I examined the details, the more convinced I became that this wasn't an emergency response to a temporary problem, but a carefully orchestrated takeover disguised as a rescue operation. Michael had likely been planning this restructuring for months, waiting for a crisis that would make his proposal seem necessary rather than opportunistic. Thursday night, I called Lisa Chen and asked her to prepare complete documentation of my ownership position in Martinez Construction. I wanted every stock purchase, every legal filing, and every financial transaction clearly documented and ready for immediate presentation. If Michael was going to force a confrontation about company control, I was prepared to reveal exactly who had been funding the company's growth for the past 4 years. Lisa worked through the night to compile a comprehensive ownership report that would leave no room for questions or challenges. The documentation showed that JM Holdings LLC had purchased 51% of Martinez Construction and Design through 17 separate transactions over 4 years, with each purchase properly recorded and filed with state agencies. The report also included a detailed breakdown of how my investments had funded equipment purchases, working capital increases, and facility improvements that had enabled the company's growth. Friday morning arrived with an unusually intense heat wave sweeping across Phoenix, with temperatures expected to reach 115 degrees by afternoon. The oppressive weather seemed to mirror the tension I felt as I prepared for what I knew would be the most important business meeting of my life. I arrived at the office early to review my documentation one final time and to mentally rehearse how I would present my ownership revelation. The timing would be crucial. I needed to wait until Michael had fully committed to his proposal and revealed the extent of his manipulation before I disclosed my position. Revealing my ownership too early might allow him to adjust his strategy or find ways to minimize the impact of my revelation. As I sat in my small office reviewing Lisa's documentation, I reflected on how dramatically the situation was about to change. For 4 years, I had been content to work behind the scenes, contributing to the company's success while allowing Michael to take credit for achievements that were partially or entirely due to my efforts. I had accepted being introduced as the help and being excluded from important decisions because I knew that my secret investments were giving me real power that Michael couldn't see or understand. But his attempt to engineer a takeover of the company crossed a line that I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about personal recognition or professional respect anymore. It was about protecting my father's legacy and ensuring that the company we had both worked to build wouldn't be stolen through manipulation and artificial crises. The confrontation that was about to unfold would change everything, not just for Michael and my father, but for me as well. Once I revealed my ownership position, I could never again be the quiet observer working behind the scenes. I would have to step forward as a leader and decision-maker, taking responsibility for the company's direction and success in ways that would be visible to everyone. As I locked the ownership documents in my briefcase and prepared for the meeting that would reshape Martinez Construction's future, I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement that I hadn't experienced since starting my own consulting business. The young woman who had been dismissed as just the help was about to become the most powerful person in the room, and the consequences of that transformation would ripple through every aspect of our family business for years to come. The conference room felt different that Friday afternoon, transformed from our usual casual meeting space into something that resembled a corporate boardroom. Michael had rearranged the furniture, positioning the rectangular table so that he could sit at the head with a clear view of everyone else. He had prepared printed agendas, something he had never done for any previous meeting, and had even brought a laptop connected to our wall-mounted monitor for what he called financial presentations. When I walked into the room at exactly 3 o'clock, the formal setup immediately confirmed my suspicions about the true nature of this gathering. This wasn't going to be a collaborative discussion about solving our cash flow challenge. It was going to be a carefully orchestrated presentation designed to pressure my father into accepting terms that had likely been predetermined without any input from our family. Already seated around the table were my father, looking uncomfortable in his best button-down shirt, our company accountant Tom Rodriguez, who appeared confused about why his presence had been requested, and Michael's attorney, James Patterson, whose presence hadn't been mentioned when the meeting was initially scheduled. The inclusion of legal counsel without prior notification was particularly telling, suggesting that Michael expected to finalize binding agreements during this meeting rather than simply exploring options. Michael barely acknowledged my entrance, gesturing vaguely toward a chair positioned at the far end of the table, away from the main discussion area. Jessica will need someone to take detailed notes of today's discussion and handle any documentation that needs to be distributed. I've set up a spot for you over there where you'll have a good view of everything. The dismissive tone and the assumption that my role would be purely secretarial rankled me, but I took the designated seat without comment. I placed my briefcase on the floor beside my chair, keeping it within easy reach for the moment when I would need to access the documents that would change everything about this meeting's dynamic. James Patterson opened his leather portfolio and began reviewing what appeared to be a lengthy legal document. Before we begin discussions about the investment proposal, he announced in the formal tone that attorneys use when they want to establish their authority, I want to ensure that everyone understands the confidentiality requirements surrounding today's conversation. The financial information and business strategies we'll be discussing are proprietary and sensitive. My father shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the legal formalities that were being imposed on a meeting about his own company. James, I appreciate the thoroughness, but this is still my business we're talking about. I'm not sure we need all these formal procedures for a discussion about short-term financing. Michael leaned forward with the patient expression he typically used when he felt someone wasn't grasping the complexity of a situation. Robert, what we're discussing today goes beyond short-term financing. This is about positioning Martinez Construction for sustainable growth and ensuring that we have the capital structure necessary to compete in today's market. David's investment proposal represents a significant opportunity, but it also involves sophisticated financial arrangements that require proper legal documentation. The way Michael framed the discussion immediately shifted the focus from solving our immediate cash flow problem to accepting a fundamental restructuring of company ownership. He was using the temporary financial pressure as leverage to push through changes that would permanently alter the balance of power in the business my father had created. Tom Rodriguez looked increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation progressed. As our accountant, he understood our financial situation better than anyone else in the room, and I could see that he was struggling with the disconnect between our actual needs and the solution being proposed. Michael, I've been reviewing our accounts, and while the delayed payment from Henderson Commercial is certainly creating some short-term pressure, we have several options for managing the cash flow issue that don't require bringing in new investors. Michael's response was swift and dismissive. Tom, I appreciate your perspective on the bookkeeping side, but strategic financial planning requires a broader view of market conditions and growth opportunities. David's analysis of our situation goes beyond simple cash management to address fundamental questions about our competitive positioning and capital efficiency. The condescension in Michael's voice when he reduced Tom's professional analysis to bookkeeping was remarkably similar to how he typically dismissed my contributions. It was becoming clear that Michael's strategy involved marginalizing anyone who might offer alternatives to his predetermined solution, regardless of their expertise or legitimate concerns. James Patterson began distributing copies of what he described as preliminary partnership restructuring documents that would formalize David Thompson's investment in Martinez Construction. The papers were significantly more complex than anything we had ever used for previous business decisions, filled with legal terminology that would be difficult for most people to fully understand without extensive study. These documents outlined the basic framework for integrating David as a strategic partner, James explained. The investment would provide immediate working capital while also establishing a more sophisticated governance structure that will support the company's expansion into larger and more complex projects. As I reviewed the preliminary documents, the true scope of Michael's plan became even more alarming than I had anticipated. The proposed restructuring wouldn't just dilute my father's ownership, it would fundamentally change how all major business decisions were made. Under the new structure, any expenditure over $50,000 would require approval from a majority of the three partners, effectively giving Michael and David veto power over my father's decisions about his own company. Even more troubling were the clauses related to operational management. The documents specified that David would assume responsibility for financial oversight and strategic planning, while Michael would handle business development and client relations. My father would be designated as a title that sounded important, but actually implementing decisions made by the other two partners. The compensation structure outlined in the documents was equally skewed. David would receive a guaranteed annual management fee of $75,000 in addition to his ownership dividends, while Michael's existing salary would increase to match that amount. My father's compensation would remain at its current level, despite the fact that his ownership percentage would be reduced and his decision-making authority would be severely limited. Perhaps most offensive was a section titled Succession Planning that outlined procedures for what would happen if any of the partners wanted to exit the business. The document gave David and Michael the right of first refusal on my father's shares if he ever wanted to sell, but it also included provisions that would allow them to force a buyout if they determined that he was, quote, unable to fulfill his operational responsibilities due to age, health, or performance issues. As I read through these provisions, I realized that Michael and David weren't just seeking to invest in Martinez Construction. They were positioning themselves to eventually take complete control of the company while minimizing the compensation my father would receive for the business he had spent decades building. My father was struggling to process the complexity of the legal language, frequently asking for clarification on terms and implications that weren't immediately obvious. Michael and James would provide explanations that sounded helpful but often obscured rather than clarified the true impact of various clauses. Robert, I know this seems overwhelming, Michael said with practiced sympathy, but sophisticated business arrangements require sophisticated documentation. What's important to understand is that this investment will solve our immediate cash flow problems, while positioning us for growth that wouldn't be possible under our current structure. Tom Rodriguez raised his hand tentatively, clearly uncomfortable with challenging Michael in front of the attorney, but feeling obligated to voice his concerns. I'm still not clear on why we need to restructure ownership to address what appears to be a temporary cash flow issue. Based on my projections, the Henderson payment should arrive within the next 2 weeks, and we have other receivables that will provide additional working capital by the end of the month. Michael's patience with Tom's questions was clearly wearing thin. Tom, your projections assume that all our current clients will pay on schedule and that we won't encounter any unexpected expenses or delays. David's investment provides a buffer that allows us to operate confidently regardless of short-term payment fluctuations. But the ownership restructuring seems disproportionate to the capital being provided, Tom persisted. $300,000 is significant, but it represents less than 20% of the company's current valuation based on our annual revenue and asset base. A 30% ownership stake seems excessive for that level of investment. This observation struck at the heart of what made Michael's proposal so problematic. Tom was absolutely correct that the ownership percentage being offered to David far exceeded what would be justified by his financial contribution alone. The deal was structured to give David control rather than simply provide capital, and the ownership allocation reflected that strategic purpose rather than fair market valuations. James Patterson intervened before Michael could respond to Tom's analysis. The ownership percentages reflect more than just the immediate capital contribution. David brings extensive real estate development experience and industry connections that add significant value beyond his financial investment. The partnership structure accounts for these strategic contributions as well as the cash infusion. This explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but it ignored the fact that my father had been building industry relationships and developing construction expertise for over 30 years. If strategic value was being factored into ownership allocations, Dad's contributions should have been weighted far more heavily than those of someone who had never actually operated a construction company. As the discussion continued, I found myself increasingly frustrated with the way my father was being maneuvered into a position where he felt grateful for an opportunity that was actually designed to exploit him. Michael and James were using sophisticated business language and artificial urgency to pressure him into making a decision that would fundamentally compromise his control over the company he had created. The breaking point came when Michael began discussing implementation timelines and suggested that we needed to finalize the partnership agreement before the end of the following week. David's offer is time-sensitive, he explained, and frankly, our cash flow situation doesn't give us the luxury of extensive deliberation. We need to move quickly to take advantage of this opportunity. The artificial urgency was clearly designed to prevent my father from seeking independent legal advice or exploring alternative financing options. Michael was creating a crisis atmosphere that would pressure Dad into accepting terms that he might reject if he had adequate time to fully consider their implications. At this point, I realized that I couldn't remain silent any longer. The conversation had moved beyond discussing options to pressuring my father into accepting a predetermined solution that would permanently damage his interests and potentially destroy the company we had both worked to build. I reached for my briefcase and removed the folder containing the ownership documentation that Lisa had prepared. The moment had arrived to reveal the secret I had been keeping for 4 years and to fundamentally alter the power dynamic in this room. Michael, I said quietly, before my father makes any decisions about restructuring company ownership, I think there's something important that everyone in this room should know. The conversation stopped abruptly as all attention shifted to me. Michael looked annoyed at the interruption, while my father appeared confused about what I might contribute to a discussion that had been entirely focused on high-level financial strategy. Jessica, we appreciate your interest in the company's future, Michael said with patronizing patience, but this discussion involves complex partnership arrangements and strategic planning that require specialized expertise. Perhaps it would be better if you focused on taking notes, so we can provide you with a summary later. His dismissive response was exactly what I had expected, and it provided the perfect setup for what I was about to reveal. Actually, Michael, I think my expertise in this area might be more relevant than you realize. I opened the folder and removed the comprehensive ownership report that Lisa had prepared, placing it on the table where everyone could see the official letterhead and legal formatting. What I'm about to share will probably surprise everyone in this room, but I think it's crucial information for making informed decisions about Martinez Construction's future. Michael's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion as he noticed the formal legal documents I had produced. Jessica, what exactly are you talking about? I looked directly at him as I spoke, ensuring that my words would have maximum impact. I'm talking about the fact that I currently own 51% of Martinez Construction and Design, which makes me the majority shareholder of this company. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the air conditioning system cycling on in the background. Michael's face went through a rapid series of expressions, from disbelief to shock to something approaching panic. My father stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language, while Tom Rodriguez leaned forward with intense interest. James Patterson was the first to recover his composure, immediately reaching for the documents to examine their authenticity and legal validity. As an attorney, he understood better than anyone else in the room what my revelation meant for the restructuring proposal he had been preparing to finalize. That's impossible, Michael said finally, his voice lacking its usual confidence. There's no way you could own 51% of this company. You're an administrative coordinator. Actually, I replied calmly, I'm an administrative coordinator who also happens to be a very successful investor. Over the past 4 years, my investment company, JM Holdings, LLC, has purchased 51% of Martinez Construction through a series of properly documented transactions. Every purchase was legal, properly filed, and conducted at fair market rates. Michael's face had gone pale as the implications of my revelation began to sink in. You're saying that you've been the anonymous investor who's been providing capital for our expansion? That's exactly what I'm saying. Every equipment purchase, every facility improvement, every working capital injection that you thought was coming from some mysterious outside investor was actually funded by your administrative coordinator, the person you've been dismissing as, quote, just the help for the past 4 years. The look of absolute shock on Michael's face was deeply satisfying, but what pleased me even more was the expression of dawning realization on my father's face. He was beginning to understand that his daughter hadn't just been working for the family business. She had been investing in it and believing in its potential, even when he had doubts about his own capabilities. James Patterson completed his review of the ownership documents and looked up with a grim expression. These documents appeared to be legitimate and properly executed. If this ownership structure is accurate, it would fundamentally change any discussion about partnership restructuring or new investor arrangements. Michael struggled to process this new reality. Even if this is true, it doesn't change the fact that we need David's investment to solve our cash flow problems. You can't just magically produce $300,000 to replace his offer. I smiled as I reached into my briefcase for the second folder I had prepared for this meeting. Actually, Michael, I can do exactly that. As the majority owner of this company, I'm prepared to provide whatever capital infusion is necessary to address our short-term cash flow needs. Unlike David's offer, my financing won't require diluting anyone's ownership or restructuring company management. The second folder contained a detailed financial proposal that I had developed as an alternative to Michael's partnership restructuring. Instead of bringing in outside investors, I was prepared to provide a direct loan to the company at favorable interest rates, with repayment terms that would work with our projected cash flow from current and upcoming projects. Michael's carefully constructed plan was collapsing around him as he realized that his artificial crisis no longer provided leverage for his takeover attempt. Not only was I in a position to solve our financial problems without external investors, but I also had the authority as majority owner to reject any proposals that weren't in the company's best interests. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. The young woman Michael had been dismissing as clerical support was suddenly the person with ultimate decision-making authority over the company's future. The emergency meeting he had orchestrated to pressure my father into accepting unfavorable terms had become the venue for revealing that his administrative coordinator was actually his boss. The atmosphere in the conference room had completely transformed in the span of 30 seconds. Michael sat frozen in his chair, staring at the ownership documents as if they might disappear if he looked at them long enough. James Patterson was frantically making notes on his legal pad, clearly calculating how this revelation would affect every aspect of the partnership proposal he had spent weeks preparing. Tom Rodriguez wore an expression of barely contained satisfaction, finally understanding why someone with my obvious business acumen had been relegated to administrative duties for so long. My father broke the stunned silence with a question that cut straight to the heart of what everyone was thinking. Jessica, honey, are you telling me that you've been secretly investing in our company for 4 years? That all those capital injections that kept us growing came from you? The vulnerability in his voice made my chest tighten with emotion. For years, I had watched his confidence erode as Michael systematically undermined his authority and dismissed his contributions. Now he was learning that his own daughter had believed in him and his company enough to invest her entire financial future in its success. Dad, I didn't keep it secret because I didn't trust you, or because I was trying to manipulate anyone. I kept it secret because I wanted to prove that Martinez Construction was a solid investment based on its own merits, not just family loyalty. Every dollar I invested was because I genuinely believed in what you built and where it could go. My father's eyes welled up with tears that he tried to hide by looking down at the documents spread across the table. But why didn't you tell me? All these years, I've been worried that we were taking advantage of some investor who might pull out if things got difficult. I've been making conservative decisions because I was afraid of disappointing someone I'd never even met. The irony of his statement hit me like a physical blow. While I had been secretly funding the company's growth and celebrating every success from behind the scenes, my father had been constraining his ambitions because he felt accountable to a mysterious investor who might judge his performance harshly. The very secrecy I had maintained to avoid being seen as merely helping family had actually limited his willingness to take the bold steps that could have accelerated our growth. Michael finally found his voice, though it lacked the commanding tone he had used throughout the meeting. Even if this ownership structure is legitimate, it doesn't change the fundamental business challenges we're facing. We still need strategic guidance and industry connections to compete effectively in today's market. His attempt to salvage some relevance for his restructuring proposal was almost pathetic, but it also revealed how deeply he misunderstood the situation. The challenges he was describing weren't weaknesses in our business model. They were problems he had created through his own mismanagement and ego-driven decision-making. Michael, the strategic challenges you're referring to are largely self-created, I replied, pulling out a third folder from my briefcase. I've been documenting operational inefficiencies and missed opportunities for the past 2 years, and I've developed comprehensive plans for addressing every issue you've raised. The folder contained detailed analyses of our project management systems, client satisfaction metrics, subcontractor relationships, and market positioning strategies. This wasn't theoretical business school knowledge. It was practical, data-driven planning based on intimate familiarity with every aspect of our operations. For example, I continued, opening to a section on client retention, our residential clients have a 93% satisfaction rate and generate 68% of our referral business. Yet you've been pushing us to abandon that market segment in favor of commercial projects, where our satisfaction rate is only 78%, and our profit margins are actually lower when you account for extended timelines and change order complications. Tom Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically as I presented data that supported the concerns he had been raising for months. Jessica's analysis aligns perfectly with what I've been seeing in our financial reports. The commercial projects look impressive in terms of total revenue, but they're actually less profitable and more risky than our residential work. Michael's face was growing redder as he realized that not only had his takeover attempt failed, but his fundamental business strategy was being systematically dismantled by the person he had consistently dismissed as incompetent. You can't just cherry-pick data to support your preferences. Business strategy requires understanding broader market trends and competitive dynamics that go beyond simple profit calculations. You're absolutely right about the importance of market trends, I agreed, turning to another section of my analysis. That's why I commissioned an independent market research study 6 months ago to examine growth opportunities in the Phoenix construction market. The results show that the residential renovation and custom home segments are projected to grow by 32% over the next 3 years, while commercial construction is expected to grow by only 18%. The market research had cost me $15,000 of my own money, but it provided objective validation for strategic decisions that Michael had been dismissing as naive or short-sighted. More importantly, it demonstrated that I had been thinking strategically about our company's future, while he had been focused primarily on consolidating his own power. James Patterson closed his portfolio and looked directly at Michael with an expression that clearly conveyed his assessment of the situation. Michael, given this new information about company ownership and strategic planning, I think we need to fundamentally reconsider the entire partnership proposal. The legal framework we've been developing is no longer applicable to the current ownership structure. The dismissal in the attorney's voice was unmistakable. James had been brought in to facilitate a specific transaction, and with that transaction no longer viable, his interest in continuing the discussion had evaporated. He began gathering his documents with the efficient movements of someone who needed to be somewhere else as quickly as possible. "James, wait," Michael said desperately. "We can adjust the proposal to accommodate Jessica's ownership position. David is still interested in investing, and we can modify the terms to reflect the current situation." But James was already standing and closing his briefcase. "Michael, I was retained to document a partnership agreement between Robert Martinez and David Thompson, with you as an existing 50% partner. The ownership structure Jessica has presented completely changes the legal foundation for any such agreement. If you want to pursue modified arrangements, you'll need to start over with new documentation and different legal premises." The attorney's departure left Michael looking increasingly isolated and desperate. His carefully orchestrated plan had not only failed, but had backfired spectacularly, revealing him as someone who had been operating under false assumptions about his own importance and authority within the company. My father was studying the market research data with intense concentration, clearly impressed by the thoroughness of my analysis and the strategic thinking it represented. "Jessica, this research is incredibly detailed. How long have you been working on comprehensive planning like this?" "About 2 years, Dad. I realized that if I was going to be a serious investor in this company, I needed to understand every aspect of our market position and competitive advantages. I've been developing 5-year growth projections, operational efficiency improvements, and expansion strategies that could double our revenue while actually reducing our risk exposure." The pride in my father's expression was something I hadn't seen directed toward me in professional contexts for years. Michael's constant undermining had made Dad hesitant to acknowledge my contributions in business settings, but now he was seeing evidence of capabilities and achievements that went far beyond what anyone had recognized. "Show me the 5-year projections," he said, his voice carrying the enthusiasm I remembered from our early conversations about construction and business strategy. I opened to the section containing detailed financial models that I had developed, using industry benchmarks, local market data, and projections based on our historical performance. The plans outlined a growth strategy that would expand our residential market share while selectively pursuing commercial projects that aligned with our operational strengths and profit requirements. "The key insight from my analysis is that we don't need to choose between residential and commercial work," I explained. "We need to be more strategic about which commercial projects we pursue. Instead of taking every large contract that becomes available, we should focus on commercial projects that leverage our residential expertise, like mixed-use developments, retail spaces in residential areas, and office buildings for service businesses." Tom Rodriguez was taking notes as I spoke, clearly excited about finally having strategic discussions based on actual data rather than Michael's intuitive preferences. This approach would also allow us to maintain the client relationships and referral networks that have been our most reliable source of new business. Michael made one last attempt to assert his relevance to the conversation. "Even with better strategic planning, we still need someone with established industry connections and business development experience to execute these growth plans effectively." This statement revealed how completely Michael had misunderstood the source of our company's success. He seemed to believe that business development meant schmoozing with other businessmen at networking events and golf courses, when in reality our most valuable connections came from satisfied clients who recommended us to friends and colleagues. "Michael, our most effective business development has always come from delivering exceptional work that generates word-of-mouth recommendations," I replied. "The industry connections you're referring to haven't actually produced sustainable business growth. They've produced individual projects that often created more problems than profits." To illustrate this point, I opened to a section of my analysis that tracked the source and profitability of every project we had completed over the past 3 years. The data clearly showed that projects originating from Michael's business connections had higher rates of scope changes, payment delays, and client satisfaction issues than projects that came through referrals from previous clients. The Henderson commercial project that created our current cash flow crisis is a perfect example, I continued. That project came through Michael's network, involved a client with no previous relationship with our company, and has been problematic from the beginning in terms of timeline changes, specification modifications, and now payment delays. My father nodded grimly as he remembered the numerous complications that had plagued the Henderson project. I remember expressing concerns about that client's financial stability during our initial discussions, but we were told that the contract size made it worth the risk. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone in the room except Michael himself. His approach to business development prioritized impressive-sounding opportunities over sustainable relationships, leading to projects that looked good on paper but created operational headaches and financial risks. As the afternoon wore on, Michael's position became increasingly untenable. Every aspect of his partnership proposal had been undermined by my ownership revelation and strategic analysis. His attempts to maintain relevance in the discussion were met with polite but firm dismissals from both my father and Tom Rodriguez, who were increasingly focused on working with me to develop implementation plans for the growth strategies I had outlined. Finally, Michael stood up and gathered his papers with jerky, agitated movements. I can see that my contributions to this company are no longer valued or wanted. Perhaps it's time for me to explore other opportunities that would better utilize my skills and experience. The implicit threat in his statement was obvious. He was suggesting that he might leave Martinez Construction and potentially take clients or subcontractors with him. In the past, this kind of threat might have created panic and desperate attempts to appease him. Now, with clear evidence of his limited actual contribution to our success, the threat felt more like an opportunity than a crisis. Michael, I respect your right to pursue whatever opportunities you feel are best for your career, I replied calmly. If you do decide to leave Martinez Construction, we'll certainly work with you to ensure a smooth transition that protects everyone's interests. My measured response clearly wasn't what he had expected. He seemed to be waiting for desperate pleas for him to reconsider or frantic negotiations about improved terms that might convince him to stay. Instead, he received professional acknowledgement of his autonomy and polite offers of cooperation for his departure. You're making a serious mistake if you think this company can succeed without my business connections and strategic guidance, he said, his voice rising with frustration. You have no idea how competitive this industry is or how difficult it will be to maintain our current success without experienced leadership. Tom Rodriguez couldn't suppress a slight smile as he responded to Michael's dire predictions. Michael, based on Jessica's analysis and our financial performance data, I'm actually more optimistic about our future prospects than I've been in years. We finally have strategic planning based on solid research and realistic projections, rather than wishful thinking about market opportunities that may not actually exist. This was the closest Tom had ever come to directly criticizing Michael's leadership, and his statement carried extra weight because of his reputation for conservative, careful analysis of business situations. If Tom was expressing optimism about our prospects without Michael, it suggested that others in our organization might also view Michael's departure as a positive development rather than a crisis. My father, who had been quietly studying my strategic planning documents throughout this exchange, finally looked up with an expression of determination that I hadn't seen from him in years. Michael, I think Jessica is right about working together to ensure a smooth transition if you decide to leave. But I want to be clear that Martinez Construction will continue operating with or without your involvement. This company existed before our partnership, and it will exist after it if necessary. The quiet strength in Dad's voice represented a fundamental shift in his relationship with Michael. For years, he had allowed Michael to position himself as indispensable to the company's success, creating a dynamic where Dad felt grateful for Michael's continued involvement, rather than confident in his own leadership capabilities. Now, with evidence of alternative strategic directions and financial resources, Dad was reclaiming his authority as the company's founder and primary decision-maker. Michael stared at my father for a long moment, apparently trying to determine whether this newfound confidence was genuine or temporary. When Dad met his gaze steadily without backing down or qualifying his statement, Michael seemed to realize that the power dynamic he had spent years cultivating had fundamentally shifted. Fine, Michael said finally. I'll need some time to consider my options and determine what arrangements would be best for everyone involved. I assume we can discuss transition details over the next few weeks. With that, he gathered his remaining papers and left the conference room without further discussion. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo with finality. The three of us who remained sat in silence for several minutes, processing what had just occurred. The meeting that was supposed to formalize Michael's takeover of Martinez Construction had instead resulted in my emergence as the company's majority owner and strategic leader, while also apparently precipitating Michael's departure from the business entirely. Tom Rodriguez was the first to speak. "Jessica, I have to say that your strategic analysis is the most comprehensive business planning I've seen for any company our size. If you can execute even half of what you've outlined, Martinez Construction could become one of the most successful firms in the Phoenix market." My father nodded enthusiastically. "I'm still processing everything that happened today, but I want you to know how proud I am of what you've accomplished. Not just the financial success that allowed you to become our primary investor, but the strategic thinking and business planning that went into your analysis. The validation from both of them meant more to me than any professional recognition I had ever received. For years, I had been working to prove my capabilities while being systematically dismissed and marginalized. Now I was finally being seen and appreciated for my actual contributions rather than being relegated to supporting roles that didn't reflect my skills or knowledge." Over the following weeks, the transition proceeded more smoothly than anyone had expected. Michael ultimately decided to leave Martinez Construction and pursue opportunities with a commercial development firm in Scottsdale. His departure removed the source of much of the tension and inefficiency that had been constraining our operations for years. With Michael gone, I was able to implement the operational improvements and strategic initiatives that I had been developing during my years of careful observation and analysis. We restructured our project management systems to focus on the residential and selective commercial markets where we had the greatest competitive advantages. We improved our subcontractor relationships by eliminating the adversarial dynamics that Michael had created through his attempts to constantly renegotiate terms and assert dominance over vendors. Most importantly, we restored the collaborative, family-oriented culture that had originally made Martinez Construction a place where people wanted to work. My father regained his confidence as a leader and craftsman, while I was finally able to contribute openly and directly to strategic decisions and business development efforts. The financial results were dramatic and immediate. Within 6 months of Michael's departure, our profit margins had improved by 28%. Our client satisfaction scores had increased to 96%, and our referral rate had doubled. The growth projections that I had outlined during that pivotal meeting were actually exceeded, as we discovered efficiencies and opportunities that had been obscured by years of misguided strategic focus. Looking back on that Friday afternoon confrontation, I realized that the most important outcome wasn't proving that Michael was wrong about business strategy, or demonstrating that I was capable of sophisticated financial analysis. The most important outcome was the restoration of trust and respect between my father and me, and the creation of a business partnership based on mutual recognition of each other's strengths and contributions. The young woman who had been dismissed as just the help had become the majority owner and strategic leader of a thriving construction company. But more importantly, she had become a respected partner in a family business that was built on genuine collaboration rather than manipulation and power struggles. The secret I had kept for 4 years had initially been about proving my investment acumen and business capabilities to myself. In the end, it became the key to transforming not just our company's ownership structure, but the entire culture and strategic direction that would define Martinez Construction's future success. The weeks following Michael's departure from Martinez Construction felt like watching a flower bloom in fast forward. Without the constant friction and undermining that had characterized our daily operations for years, the company began functioning with an efficiency and harmony that surprised even me. The transformation wasn't just about improved processes or better financial management. It was about unleashing the creative energy and collaborative spirit that had been suppressed under Michael's domineering leadership style. My first major decision as the acknowledged majority owner was to restructure our organizational hierarchy in a way that reflected actual contributions rather than artificial power dynamics. Tom Rodriguez was promoted to Chief Financial Officer, a title that accurately reflected the strategic financial guidance he had been providing, despite being officially designated as just our accountant. Amanda Rodriguez, our office manager who had been quietly keeping our administrative systems running smoothly while being largely ignored by Michael, was given expanded responsibilities for client communications and project coordination. Most significantly, I worked with my father to redefine our respective roles in a way that honored both his decades of construction expertise and my business development capabilities. Rather than the traditional father passes business to daughter succession model, we created a partnership where Dad served as president of operations, overseeing all construction activities and maintaining his beloved hands-on involvement with actual building projects, while I assumed the role of CEO, focusing on strategic planning, business development, and financial management. This arrangement worked perfectly because it aligned with our natural strengths and interests. Dad had always been happiest when he was solving construction challenges and working directly with skilled craftsmen to create beautiful, functional spaces. The administrative burden and strategic planning requirements that came with business growth had been sources of stress rather than satisfaction for him. Now he could focus entirely on what he loved most, while trusting that the business side was being handled competently. For me, stepping into the CEO role felt like finally putting on clothes that fit properly after years of wearing ill-fitting hand-me-downs. The strategic planning, market analysis, financial modeling, and business development activities that I had been doing secretly for years could now be done openly and with full organizational support. I no longer had to hide my capabilities or pretend that my insights were less valuable than they actually were. The first major test of our new organizational structure came in October, when we received an inquiry about a large residential development project that would involve building 24 custom homes in a luxury subdivision near Scottsdale. The project was exactly the type of opportunity that Michael would have pursued aggressively, viewing it as a chance to demonstrate our capability for large-scale operations and establish relationships with high-end developers. However, my analysis of the project revealed several red flags that made it a poor fit for our current capabilities and strategic objectives. The developer had an unrealistic timeline that would require us to hire temporary workers and subcontractors we hadn't worked with before, significantly increasing our quality control risks. The contract terms included penalty clauses for delays that could cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars if we encountered normal construction complications, like weather delays or permit issues. Most problematically, pursuing this project would require us to neglect our existing client relationships and delay several smaller residential projects that were already scheduled. These existing clients represented the referral network that generated our most profitable and sustainable business growth. Disappointing them for the sake of one large contract could damage relationships that had taken years to build. When I presented my analysis to Dad and recommended that we decline the opportunity, his response demonstrated how much our working relationship had evolved. Instead of second-guessing my judgment or worrying about missing out on a prestigious project, he carefully reviewed my reasoning and asked thoughtful questions about alternative approaches we might consider. What if we proposed a modified timeline that would allow us to complete our existing commitments before starting the development project? He asked. Or could we suggest a phased approach where we build the homes in smaller groups over a longer period? These were exactly the kinds of creative solutions that our family business could explore, because we weren't constrained by Michael's ego-driven need to accept every challenge exactly as presented. We could propose terms that worked for our operational capacity and strategic objectives, rather than simply trying to prove that we were capable of handling whatever demands were placed on us. Unfortunately, when I contacted the developer with our alternative proposals, it became clear that they were committed to their original timeline and weren't interested in modifications that would better serve both parties' long-term interests. This confirmed my initial assessment that the project would have been problematic regardless of how capable our construction team might have been. The developer's inflexibility also revealed something important about their approach to contractor relationships. They viewed construction companies as interchangeable service providers, who should adapt to whatever terms were offered, rather than partners who might contribute valuable insights about realistic timelines and quality standards. This attitude typically led to adversarial relationships that created problems throughout the construction process. 6 months later, we learned through industry contacts that the developer had hired a larger commercial construction firm to complete the project, and that the endeavor had been plagued by exactly the problems I had anticipated. The rush timeline had led to quality control issues that required expensive corrections. Several of the homes had failed final inspections due to code violations, and the project had ultimately taken 8 months longer than originally scheduled. This validation of my strategic analysis was professionally satisfying, but more importantly, it demonstrated to our entire organization that thoughtful planning and realistic assessment of opportunities could prevent costly mistakes that might look like missed opportunities in the short term but were actually smart business decisions. The confidence boost that came from successfully navigating this decision influenced every aspect of our operations over the following months. Instead of anxiously pursuing every potential contract that became available, we began evaluating opportunities based on clear criteria that reflected our strategic objectives and operational capabilities. This selective approach allowed us to focus our energy and resources on projects where we could deliver exceptional results while building sustainable client relationships. One of the most rewarding aspects of this more strategic approach was the improvement in our work environment and company culture. Without the constant pressure to prove ourselves by taking on inappropriate projects or working under unrealistic timelines, our construction crews could focus on craftsmanship and problem-solving rather than simply trying to meet arbitrary deadlines. Stephen Parker, our head contractor who had been with the company since its early days, noticed the change immediately. "Jessica, I don't know what you did differently, but working here feels like it did in the old days when your dad first started the company," he told me during one of our weekly project review meetings. "People aren't stressed out all the time, and we can actually take pride in our work instead of just trying to get through each day." This feedback was particularly meaningful because Stephen had been one of the casualties of Michael's management style. Despite being an exceptionally skilled craftsman with deep knowledge of construction techniques and building codes, Stephen had been repeatedly criticized by Michael for taking too much time on quality control issues and for raising concerns about unrealistic project specifications. Under our new operational approach, Stephen's expertise and attention to detail were recognized as valuable assets rather than obstacles to efficiency. We began involving him in project planning discussions so that potential construction challenges could be identified and addressed before they became expensive problems. This proactive approach not only improved our project outcomes, but also made Stephen feel valued and respected as a professional. The positive changes in our company culture had measurable impacts on our business performance. Our employee turnover rate dropped to nearly zero, which saved us thousands of dollars in recruitment and training costs, while also improving project continuity and quality consistency. Our subcontractor relationships became more collaborative and reliable as word spread through the industry that Martinez Construction was a good company to work with, rather than a source of constant pressure and unrealistic demands. Most importantly, our client satisfaction scores reached levels that we had never achieved during Michael's tenure as partner. The combination of realistic project timelines, proactive communication, and focus on craftsmanship created experiences that exceeded client expectations and generated enthusiastic referrals to friends and family members. By the spring of our second year under the new organizational structure, Martinez Construction had achieved financial performance that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Our revenue had increased by 43% compared to the previous year, but more importantly, our profit margins had improved by 37% due to more efficient operations and better project selection. These results attracted attention from industry publications and business organizations throughout Arizona. I was invited to speak at a construction industry conference about strategic planning for small businesses, and Martinez Construction was featured in a Phoenix Business Journal article about successful family-owned companies in the region. The recognition felt gratifying, but what meant more to me was the pride I saw in my father's eyes when he read these articles or attended industry events where people praised our company's success. For years, he had felt defensive about his business acumen and apologetic about the challenges our company faced. Now he could hold his head high as the founder and operational leader of a respected and successful construction firm. The transformation in Dad's confidence had personal dimensions that went beyond our professional relationship. He began talking enthusiastically about construction projects and business strategies during our family dinners, sharing insights and ideas with the kind of intellectual excitement that I remembered from my childhood but hadn't seen in years. He also started giving me credit publicly for the strategic planning and business development that had contributed to our success. At industry events, he would introduce me not as his daughter who helped with administrative work, but as his business partner whose financial analysis and market research had guided the company's growth strategy. This public recognition of my contributions felt like the completion of a journey that had begun years earlier when I first started secretly investing in the family business. The young woman who had been dismissed as just the help was now being acknowledged as a strategic leader whose insights and capabilities were essential to our company's success. The personal growth that accompanied these professional changes was equally significant. Learning to assert authority and make difficult decisions had built confidence that influenced every aspect of my life. I found myself speaking up more readily in social situations, pursuing personal interests that I had previously considered too ambitious or impractical, and generally approaching challenges with the kind of strategic thinking that had proven successful in business contexts. One unexpected benefit of my increased confidence was the impact it had on my romantic relationships. I had always struggled with dating because I found it difficult to authentically represent my capabilities and ambitions when my professional life required me to downplay both. Men I met socially often seemed intimidated when they learned about my business education and analytical capabilities, while men I met through work saw me only in the diminished role that Michael had created for me. Now that my professional identity aligned with my actual capabilities and achievements, I could be genuine about my interests and ambitions without worrying about managing other people's expectations or assumptions. This authenticity attracted people who were genuinely compatible with who I actually was, rather than who I felt pressured to pretend to be. The romantic relationship that developed from this newfound authenticity became another source of personal satisfaction and growth. David Chen, an architect who worked with several construction companies in the Phoenix area, initially approached me about potential collaboration between our firms. Our professional discussions evolved into personal conversations and eventually into a relationship built on mutual respect for each other's expertise and ambitions. What made this relationship different from previous romantic experiences was David's genuine appreciation for my business acumen and strategic thinking. Instead of feeling threatened by my success or trying to minimize my achievements, he was fascinated by the analytical approaches I used for market research and financial planning. Our conversations about business strategy and industry trends were intellectually stimulating in ways that enhanced rather than competed with our personal connection. David's architectural background also provided valuable perspectives on construction projects that complemented my business analysis and Dad's operational expertise. When we began collaborating professionally on custom home projects, the combination of his design vision, my strategic planning, and Dad's construction knowledge created results that exceeded what any of us could have achieved independently. These collaborative projects represented the kind of creative, intellectually satisfying work that I had always imagined when I dreamed about being involved in the family business. Instead of managing administrative details while others made creative decisions, I was contributing strategic insights that influenced design choices and construction approaches from the earliest stages of project development. The integration of architectural collaboration into our business model opened up market opportunities that we had never previously considered. High-end custom homes that incorporated innovative design elements with superior construction quality commanded premium prices, while also generating the kind of portfolio pieces that attracted additional clients seeking similar unique projects. By our third year under the new organizational structure, Martinez Construction had evolved from a traditional construction company into something more sophisticated and strategic. We had developed expertise in design-build projects that offered clients comprehensive services from initial conceptualization through final construction. This integrated approach allowed us to maintain control over project quality while also capturing revenue that would otherwise go to separate architectural firms. The business model evolution also created opportunities for expansion that aligned with our strategic objectives and operational capabilities. Rather than growing by taking on more projects of the same type, we were growing by offering more comprehensive services to clients who valued quality and innovation over simple cost minimization. This approach to growth felt sustainable and exciting in ways that Michael's expansion strategies never had. Instead of constantly trying to prove our capabilities by accepting increasingly challenging projects, we were building expertise and reputation that attracted clients who specifically sought out our unique combination of services. The financial success that resulted from this strategic evolution exceeded anything I had projected during my years of secret planning and investment. The company that I had quietly acquired majority control of had become not just profitable, but genuinely valuable as a business asset that could support both my father's retirement security and my own long-term financial objectives. More importantly, Martinez Construction had become the kind of workplace and business entity that we could both be proud of. We were known throughout the Phoenix construction industry for quality work, fair dealing, and innovative approaches to complex projects. Our employees were respected professionals who took pride in their contributions to our success. Our clients were enthusiastic advocates who referred friends and family members because they genuinely believed in the value we provided. The transformation from a company where I was dismissed as clerical support to a business where I was recognized as a strategic leader and majority owner represented more than professional advancement. It represented the fulfillment of ambitions and capabilities that had been suppressed for years by other people's assumptions about my role and value. Standing in our expanded offices on a sunny Arizona morning, reviewing architectural plans for 3 simultaneous custom home projects, while my father discussed construction timelines with Stephen and David sketched design modifications based on client feedback, I realized that the secret I had kept for 4 years had ultimately created something more valuable than I had ever imagined. The quiet administrative coordinator who had been funding her family's business success from behind the scenes had become the CEO of a thriving company that combined everything she loved about construction, business strategy, and creative problem-solving. The young woman who had been told she was just the help had proven that sometimes the most powerful position in the room belongs to the person whose contributions others consistently underestimate. The unexpected phone call came on a Tuesday morning in September, 3 years after Michael's departure from Martinez Construction. I was reviewing blueprints for a sustainable home project that incorporated solar panels and rainwater collection systems when Amanda Rodriguez knocked on my office door with an expression that immediately caught my attention. "Jessica, there's someone on line 2 who says he needs to speak with you urgently about a business matter. He wouldn't give me details, but he sounds pretty desperate," she said, holding the phone with obvious curiosity about the mysterious caller. When I picked up the line, Michael's voice was barely recognizable. The confident, commanding tone that had once intimidated my father and dismissed my contributions had been replaced by something that sounded strained and uncertain. "Jessica, I know this is awkward given how things ended between us, but I'm hoping we can have a professional conversation about a business opportunity that might benefit both of us." The irony of receiving this call was not lost on me. The man who had spent years treating me as irrelevant administrative support was now approaching me as someone whose business judgment and resources he apparently needed. The power dynamic that had once made me feel invisible had completely reversed, and Michael was the one seeking acknowledgement and assistance. "I'm willing to listen," I replied carefully, curious about what circumstances could have led to this unexpected outreach. "What kind of opportunity are you referring to?" Michael's explanation revealed a situation that was both tragic and predictable. The commercial development firm he had joined after leaving Martinez Construction had initially seemed like the perfect platform for his ambitions. The company, Pinnacle Development Group, specialized in large-scale retail and office projects throughout Arizona and had offered Michael a partnership track that promised significant financial rewards and industry recognition. However, within 18 months of joining Pinnacle, Michael had discovered that the company's impressive portfolio was built on financial practices that were significantly more aggressive than anything we had ever considered at Martinez Construction. Pinnacle routinely underbid projects to win contracts, then relied on change orders and cost overruns to achieve profitability. They used subcontractors who offered the lowest prices regardless of quality or reliability, leading to construction delays and expensive corrections that were passed along to clients through complex contract provisions. Most problematically, Pinnacle had been financing their rapid expansion through loans that required personal guarantees from partners, meaning that Michael had become personally liable for millions of dollars in corporate debt without fully understanding the implications of these arrangements. When the Arizona commercial real estate market experienced a downturn that reduced demand for new office construction, Pinnacle's leveraged financial structure had quickly become unsustainable. "The company filed for bankruptcy protection last month," Michael explained, his voice carrying a vulnerability that I had never heard before. "As a partner, I'm facing personal liability for debts that could wipe out everything I've worked for over the past 20 years. My house, my retirement savings, everything is at risk because of guarantees I signed without really understanding what I was agreeing to." The situation he described was a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing rapid growth and impressive-sounding opportunities over sustainable business practices and careful financial management. Michael's pursuit of the kind of high-stakes commercial development that he had always claimed was superior to our family business approach had led him into exactly the kind of financial disaster that conservative planning was designed to prevent. "I'm sorry to hear about your difficulties," I said sincerely. "Despite our professional conflicts, I didn't wish financial ruin on anyone, especially someone who had been part of our company's growth for several years. But I'm not sure how Martinez Construction could be helpful with the legal and financial challenges you're facing." Michael's response revealed the true purpose of his call. "Jessica, I've been thinking about returning to the construction industry but starting over as an independent contractor rather than trying to work with another development firm. I have relationships with several commercial clients who might be interested in working with someone they trust, but I don't have the capital or operational infrastructure to handle significant projects independently." He paused, apparently gathering courage for what he was about to propose. "I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity for Martinez Construction to serve as a subcontractor for projects that I could bring in through my client relationships. You would handle all the actual construction work and project management, while I would focus on business development and client relations for the commercial side of your operations." The proposal was remarkable for several reasons, not least of which was Michael's apparent assumption that I would be interested in working with him again after the way our previous partnership had ended. More significantly, he was suggesting a relationship where he would be the dependent party seeking support from the company he had once tried to control, while I would be in the position of evaluating whether his contributions would be valuable enough to justify the complications of re-engaging with him professionally. "That's an interesting concept," I replied, buying time to process the full implications of what he was suggesting. "But it would represent a significant change in our business model and operational focus. We've been very successful concentrating on residential projects and selective commercial work that aligns with our core competencies." Michael's response revealed how much his perspective on business strategy had changed as a result of his experiences with Pinnacle Development. "I understand your concerns about expanding into commercial work, and honestly, after what I've been through, I have a much better appreciation for the value of conservative growth and sustainable business practices. The clients I'm thinking about wouldn't require the kind of aggressive expansion or financial risk-taking that got me into trouble with Pinnacle." This acknowledgement of the wisdom of approaches he had previously dismissed was perhaps the most surprising aspect of our conversation. The man who had consistently criticized our family business for being too conservative and lacking in ambition was now presenting caution and sustainability as attractive qualities that would differentiate us from competitors who prioritized growth over stability. "I'm willing to consider the possibility," I said finally, "but it would need to be structured in a way that protects Martinez Construction's interests and aligns with our strategic objectives. Any collaboration would need to be evaluated based on the same criteria we use for all business decisions. Does it enhance our capabilities, serve our long-term goals, and create value for our existing stakeholders?" The conversation that followed revealed a Michael Thompson who was dramatically different from the person who had tried to orchestrate a takeover of our family business 3 years earlier. His proposals were modest rather than grandiose, focused on specific opportunities rather than broad market domination, and explicitly designed to complement our existing operations rather than redirect them toward his preferred approach. Most importantly, his language acknowledged the authority and expertise that he had previously dismissed. Instead of telling me what Martinez Construction should do to improve its performance, he was asking what he could do to contribute value to our established success. The dynamic had shifted from him instructing me about business strategy to him seeking my approval for his ideas about potential collaboration. After ending the call, I spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about the unexpected reversal of circumstances that Michael's situation represented. The aggressive growth strategies and impressive-sounding opportunities that he had championed during his time with our company had ultimately led to exactly the kind of financial disaster that careful planning and conservative management were designed to prevent. Meanwhile, the family business approach that he had criticized as lacking in ambition and sophistication had generated steady growth, strong profitability, and industry recognition that positioned us as one of the most respected construction firms in the Phoenix area. The strategic planning and analytical rigor that he had dismissed as unnecessary complexity had enabled us to identify opportunities and avoid risks in ways that created sustainable competitive advantages. When I discussed Michael's proposal with my father that evening, his response reflected the wisdom and confidence that had emerged as he reclaimed his role as a respected business leader. Jessica, the decision about whether to work with Michael again is entirely yours to make. You're the CEO of this company, and you understand our strategic objectives and operational capabilities better than anyone. He paused thoughtfully before continuing. But I will say that his willingness to approach us for help suggests that he's learned some important lessons about business relationships and sustainable growth. If you think there are ways to work with him that would benefit our company without creating unnecessary risks, I'm open to exploring those possibilities. This response demonstrated how completely our working relationship had evolved, from the days when Dad felt pressured to defer to Michael's business judgment despite his own reservations. Now he trusted my strategic analysis and decision-making capabilities enough to support whatever approach I determined would be best for our company's interests. Over the following weeks, I conducted extensive research into Michael's claims about his client relationships and the commercial opportunities he believed he could generate. This investigation revealed that his assertions were largely accurate. Several Phoenix area businesses that had worked with him during his time at Pinnacle were indeed interested in finding reliable construction partners for upcoming projects. More importantly, my analysis suggested that selective engagement with well-qualified commercial clients could complement our residential focus without requiring the kind of operational expansion or financial risk-taking that had characterized Michael's previous approach to business development. The key would be maintaining strict criteria for project selection and ensuring that any commercial work aligned with our core competencies in quality construction and client relationship management. After careful consideration, I decided to propose a trial arrangement that would allow us to evaluate the potential benefits of working with Michael while protecting Martinez Construction from the financial and operational risks that had previously characterized his business approach. Under this arrangement, Michael would serve as an independent business development consultant rather than an employee or partner, receiving compensation based on successfully completed projects rather than guaranteed payments or ownership stakes. The structure I proposed placed all project selection and management decisions under Martinez Construction's control, with Michael serving as a liaison with commercial clients rather than as a decision-maker about construction approaches or timelines. This arrangement would allow us to benefit from his client relationships and commercial market knowledge, while ensuring that our company's operational standards and strategic objectives remained the primary considerations for all business decisions. Michael's response to this proposal revealed how much his circumstances had changed his perspective on professional relationships and business arrangements. Instead of negotiating for more favorable terms or expressing concerns about the limited nature of his proposed role, he expressed gratitude for the opportunity to work with a company he now recognized as professionally managed and financially stable. Jessica, I want you to know how much I appreciate your willingness to consider working with me again, especially given how our previous relationship ended, he said during our follow-up conversation. I've learned a lot about business management and strategic planning over the past few years, and I have tremendous respect for what you've accomplished with Martinez Construction. This acknowledgement of my business achievements and capabilities represented a complete reversal from the dismissive attitude he had maintained during his time as Dad's partner. The woman he had once characterized as just the help was now someone whose professional judgment and strategic leadership he explicitly respected and sought to support. The trial period that began in November exceeded both my expectations and Michael's projections for commercial business development. His client relationships generated 3 significant projects over 4 months, including an office renovation for a medical practice, a retail space conversion for a specialty grocery store, and a restaurant expansion that required complex coordination with health department regulations and accessibility compliance requirements. What made these projects particularly successful was the way they complemented rather than competed with our residential focus. The commercial clients were small business owners who valued quality workmanship and reliable project management over lowest bid pricing and fastest completion times. Their priorities aligned perfectly with the construction standards and client relationship approaches that had made Martinez Construction successful in the residential market. Michael's role in these projects was exactly what I had envisioned when I structured our collaboration agreement. He served as the primary client contact for initial discussions and project development, but all technical decisions and construction management remained under the control of our established operational team. This division of responsibilities allowed him to contribute his strengths in client relations and commercial market knowledge, while ensuring that project execution reflected the quality standards and efficiency practices that had become hallmarks of our company's reputation. Perhaps most importantly, Michael's approach to these collaborative projects demonstrated genuine respect for the expertise and authority of other team members. Instead of trying to override construction decisions or impose his preferences about project timelines, he deferred to Dad's operational expertise and supported the project management systems that I had developed over years of careful analysis and improvement. The financial results of our commercial expansion were remarkable, not just in terms of additional revenue, but also in terms of improved profit margins compared to our historical performance on similar projects. The combination of Michael's client development capabilities with our company's operational efficiency and quality standards created a competitive advantage that allowed us to command premium pricing while delivering exceptional value to commercial clients. By the end of the trial period, it was clear that the collaboration was benefiting all parties involved. Martinez Construction had successfully expanded into a new market segment without compromising our core competencies or operational standards. Our commercial clients were enthusiastic about the quality of work and project management they had received, leading to referrals and repeat business opportunities that promised sustained growth in this area. Michael had succeeded in rebuilding his professional reputation and generating income that would help him recover from the financial losses he had experienced with Pinnacle Development. More importantly, he had demonstrated that the business relationship failures of our previous partnership could be overcome through mutual respect and clearly defined roles that honored everyone's contributions and expertise. The success of our renewed collaboration led to an unexpected conversation about the possibility of formalizing Michael's role within Martinez Construction's organizational structure. During a project review meeting in March, he asked whether there might be opportunities for him to become more permanently involved with our company's commercial development activities. I realized that I forfeited any claim to partnership status when I left the company 3 years ago, he said carefully. But I'm wondering if there might be a role that would allow me to contribute to Martinez Construction's long-term success, while also providing me with more stability and growth opportunities than independent consulting arrangements typically offer. This inquiry represented a remarkable evolution from the adversarial relationship that had characterized our previous professional interactions. Instead of demanding recognition or making ultimatums about his contributions, Michael was expressing interest in earning a permanent place within an organizational structure that clearly recognized my authority as CEO and strategic decision-maker. After discussing the possibility with Dad and Tom Rodriguez, I concluded that there could indeed be value in formalizing Michael's role, provided that any such arrangement was structured to support rather than compete with our established leadership and operational systems. The position I ultimately offered him was Director of Commercial Development, a role that would focus specifically on business development and client relations for commercial projects, while maintaining clear boundaries around construction operations and strategic planning. The compensation package for this position reflected both the value of Michael's contributions and the realities of his changed circumstances. Instead of the partnership stake and management authority he had once demanded, he would receive a competitive salary plus performance bonuses tied to the profitability of commercial projects he generated. This structure aligned his financial interests with our company's success while ensuring that compensation reflected actual contributions rather than theoretical strategic value. Michael's acceptance of this offer represented the final resolution of the professional conflicts that had once threatened to destroy our family business. The man who had tried to marginalize my father and dismiss my contributions had become a productive team member, whose success depended on supporting the leadership and operational systems that we had developed in his absence. Standing in our expanded conference room on the morning when we signed Michael's employment agreement, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this point. The young woman who had been characterized as just the help during Michael's previous tenure was now the CEO whose approval he sought for his employment terms. The family business that he had tried to restructure and control was now offering him an opportunity to rebuild his career under leadership that valued collaboration over domination. The secret investment strategy that had begun as a way to protect my family's interests had ultimately created a business environment where everyone could contribute their best capabilities without the interpersonal conflicts and power struggles that had previously limited our potential. Martinez Construction had become not just financially successful, but genuinely collaborative in ways that benefited clients, employees, and stakeholders alike. The transformation from dismissed administrative support to recognized business leader had required patience, strategic thinking, and the courage to reveal capabilities that others had consistently underestimated. But the outcome had exceeded even my most optimistic projections, creating not just professional success, but personal fulfillment that came from building something meaningful with people I respected and trusted. The woman who had once been told she didn't deserve a voice in company decisions was now making choices that would shape the future of a thriving business and the careers of everyone who worked there. Sometimes the most powerful position in any room belongs to the person whose true capabilities remain hidden until the moment when revealing them can create the most positive change for everyone involved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.